The views expressed on Talk Real Solutions, hosted by Tyrone Thompson at talkrealsolutions.com, are the views of Tyrone Thompson and do not reflect the views of talkrealsolutions.com, YouTube, or etc. The content here belongs to Talk Real Solutions and its many contributors. Views and opinions expressed by all contributors belong to them and not talkrealsolutions.com or Tyrone Thompson, the host, or etc. All data and information provided on the site is for informational purposes only. Talk Real Solutions makes no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information on this site and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis.
In a world where there's crime, corruption, violence, murder, rape, theft, and all forms of atrocities that plague the world in which we live in today, way witnessing we are living in a state of chaos, and will take a greater or more extreme chaos to restore the order in which the world we live in today. Good evening. What's good, everybody? What's good? It is the Chaos Rain Show here. Welcome again. Today we're going to delve more deep into this book we call The Dating Divide. And as you know, this particular session will be a two-part into Chapter 2. And Chapter 2 is titled, From the Back Porch to the Computer Screen, The Rise of Couch of Choice in Courtship. The place of all others, court of a young lady is her home, and the only right way for a young lady to receive the address of young men is with the knowledge and consent of her mother and under that mother own supervision, by George Hudson, 1883. Make sure you guys hit the like button, share the stream, all good things, And that's pretty much it. So I'm not gonna waste more time on this. We're gonna go this is gonna be part one of this particular chapter. So let's get into it. And like always, matter of fact, let me take a look. I'm just doing something right now, guys. All right, good. All right, good. If you have any questions, guys, I'll take the calls down the line in a little bit. All right, let's delve into this chapter. Let's begin. Historically, the U.S. courtship follows a what they call chaperone home calling model, or chaperone home calling, or whatever you want to call it, like the ones described in the late 19th century marriage guides for young men, except in the epigraphs. I don't know what that is, but let's keep going. The evolution of courtship from the colonial era to today is the shift from a formal process involving intense third-party meditation to an informal process that has elevated the roles of the individual interests ahead of families or communities' demands. It has reflected changes in the U.S. economy, families, and society's aim of a growing emphasis on individual choice, primarily more from the female side of things, if you know what I mean. And let me make sure everything's good, man. And let me make sure. All right. Gender racial oppression has been part and parcel of the U.S. courtship all along. As we discussed in Chapter 1, it has been central to the state enforcement of sexual boundaries for at least 3 centuries. Indeed, the invention of dating in the early 20th century reduced the roles of the state and family and individuals. Material relations in ways that parallel the perceptional decline of the agrarian or agrarian family economy. At the same time, though not at all consensual, postbellum antebellum segregation or anti-miscegregation laws solidified legal definitions of race in the United States, along with the emergence of consumer culture codified racial categories created in contexts in which a what they call prospective partner race was increasingly framed as one among many dimensions of individuals' preference. We might call it commercialist discrimination. In this chapter, the following we document the ways of legacy of U.S. racial and gender hierarchies and notions of personal preference has shaped its citizens' approaching to online dating, resulting of the new form of digital sexual racism. To help bring these legacies into views, however, we first explore how race and gender came to the bound up in the evolution of dating and courtship in the United States, and how laws and institutions that prohibit sexual intimacy across the color lines were in terms internalized and actively resurged through dating self-regulations. Marriage and collective choice. Despite all the sentiments associated with romance, love, and fidelity, marriage has always been at the heart a contract. Let's read that again. Despite all sentiments associated with romance, love, and fidelity, marriage has always been at the heart a contract. And you hear some folks nowadays, especially some women, come on say, "Why you need a piece of paper?" And I hear some dudes say, "Why you need a paper?" Simple, because you're engaged in commerce, i.e., contract. This is a bond between two parties. Keep that in mind. Let's continue. This was particularly true in the pre-industrial agricultural societies. For white elites, marriage cements the political alliance and consolidates intergenerational or integrational transfer of wealth or intergenerational transfer. But ever for three and free families with free assets, marriage established social status and sanctions of stability, production of offspring into a family unit, ushering mutual sustenance viva each family member labor's contribution, or vice versa. For these reasons, courtship during the U.S. colonial through Victorian eras was commonly conceived as a family undertaking. Parents had great incentives to monitor their children's sexuality. We're going to highlight that. Yes, we want to give that a good marker because that's very interesting about the sexuality piece. All right. They were also in charge of finding the right families which would to form the unions, and their decisions were supported by the state and religious institutions. Such marriage were sometimes arranged prior to the sexual monarchy or maturity, particularly among the white upper class, where marriage were not arranged early on. Parents were actively involved in the courtship process upon their child's sexual debut. The kind of third party influence in which the parties of a marriage follow not only their personal preference, but also those of families, communities, religious institutions, dominant marriage decisions among free people until the 20th century. So it didn't really take more hold of who they decided to get married until the last century. For those that don't know, it was not in the 17. No, it was around. I would say roughly in the mid part of the 20th century, in my opinion. Or actually, yeah, the mid part. Yeah, I'm right. In contrast, calling courtship among the elite typically took place in the woman's home under the supervision of her parents. In such case, the visit were prearranged through consultation between the parents of both prospect husband and wife. A traditional still evidenced by some contemporary marriage practice, such as father symbolizing giving away their daughter, or symbolically giving away their daughter in wedding ceremonies, and by grooms asking the bride family for their blessing before engagement. Both the original and the Vestal Vestal practice, of course, reflects women's historical role as property to the exchange between father and husband. A young person family social network also largely determines who they could court and marry throughout U.S. history. Because the proposal of 18th and 19th century marriage was often to facilitate property inheritance, especially among land-holding white families, reproduction, and social cohesion, parents desire unions that maintain the family status. Families or familial control courtship in this way also ensures formal racial separation of whites from both slave and from free black populations, leaving little room for even a strong, willing woman to select a male outside her own race. This is true. Religion or class. Edogamian or endogamian or marriage limits the same group members, still generally characterized by the typical U.S. Union, as we see in the introductory chapter of this book. To be sure, the right to marry is enjoyed widely in the United States today. Both that is a very recent and not at all settled developed significant swarm of U.S. Americans have been demised or dense the right to marry, including lesbians, gays, Americans. But for our proposed here, we must delve into the marriage exclusion as it relates to specifically to enslaved people legally recognizing of marriage. Among chattel slavery would jeopardize white families' lines of inheritance. You hear that? So no matter if you're a black woman marrying or you a man taking on a white woman, you're jeopardizing the inheritance of what they call white wealth, or within certain families that have something to give and want to take from you and you to not have no bag. You're not holding no bag. They hold all the bags. Give them the bag. Given that the people themselves were treated as heritable properties and a form of intergenerational wealth. Yet some slave owners encouraged informed marriage among the enslaved. Slave marriage were seen as bolstering a more stable workforce and reducing attributions via runaways. They also produced children whose very existence expand whites' properties, portfolios, marital unions, and courtship rituals under slavery then did not function as an economic system to benefit of slaves as they did the young whites. Instead, these relations emphasize the companionship, emotional support, and mutual protection in a way that interestingly precedes contemporary low marriage narratives, but lack the social legal protection plague slave unions with uncertainty and what they call invasiveness, with many unions dissolving at the auction block. Marriage among the enslaved were also decoupled from sexual exclusivities. Enslaved women often had no choice in reproduction matters and were frequently forced into sexual relations that would expand their master's property. Chattel slavery, anybody? Used as cattle. And most of the cattle was mostly more a forced issue in the late 1700s. Wherever the children were fathered by the owner, a woman, commonly common husband, or another enslaved man, all were considered property at birth. Thus, the precariousness of slave life led to futile unions of unauthorized beginnings and exact endings. Nevertheless, the historical records indicate that slaves established a mostly fulfilling courtship and a proliferation of farms within the plantation abroad at their plantation and the mixed status free slaves complies or couples. Some enslaved men and women trade their freedom for the ability to stay in what they call proximity to their husbands or wives as well as children and other kin. Archival or archives evidence also shows that enslaved parents and their kin were at time actively involved in their children courtship process. They sometimes exert influence or their children choice of what they call courting partners, and through they were largely without property, many patches together resource to form the couple's new household. 19th century immigrants to the United States, three black living outside of slave status, and others poor and working class U.S. American theoretically enjoyed the legal protection of marriage and the benefits. However, they had far less status or properties to protect them. The elite that meant fewer reasons to police their offspring sexuality and assure property matches or secure property matches. Thus, while marriage still plays an important role in economic production and centering or consenting social ties within these communities, working class youth have more autonomy in their romantic exploration. The church exerts a strong influence of the sexual mores of the poor and elite alike, but the prevalence of consensual unions among the poor and working class come with a more accepting status towards premarital pregnancy or pregnancy. hmm That calling courtship had competition among the working class does not mean that it was absent. Many of the same calling courtship practice undertaken by white elites were as important to other classes, such that the example that what they call chaperones who had become part of the highly ritualized calling cultures of the Victorian era commonly enforced gender or gender status, gender social virtues among the working class, particularly those groups with strong religious ties. James Adam in 1909 note that those among the Latin race of immigrants families in Chicago, for instance, exercise. Let's look at this. Careful, what they call chaperoning or chaperones over their marriageable daughters. I think it's called chaperonges. Yeah. Susan Calm documents what she called the competing morality of Southern black communities, evidence similar to how well-to-do black families restrict the sexual access of their appropriate age daughters through a supervision called culture reform, reference to as keeping company. Hmm. Interesting. This is by Susan Cohen. Y'all can look this up. Susan Cohen. Cahn. That's her last name. Y'all can look her up. And that thing what they did with the daughters called Keeping Company. And that I'm going to highlight. So that looks like some to look at. All right. Among the Black American communities, traditionally, gender ideologies also play an influential role in monitoring courtship process. Given the hardship endured by enslaved families, many Black elites believe that the traditional model of marriage and procreation centers provision racist stereotypes among Black femininity. Hmm, interesting. And masculinity that so often demonize African American family life. Marriage, therefore, signals property conduct, understood by elites as necessary for the advancement of the African American community. Thus, imperative also involves the promise of patriarchy protection, so that Black women could access economic, legal, physical, and social, sexual protection in matrimonial, a political and respectability ideology. Therefore, because the guiding principles of the intellectual and political works of many Black leaders include W.E.B. Du Bois, still working class Black adolescents had relatively more sexual freedom than either whites or Black elites. Let me read it again. Still working class Black adolescents had relatively more sexual freedom than other whites or Black elites. As argued by Shirley A. Hill, many Black women insist on forming families that challenge patriarchal ideology of courtship and marriage as they reclaim their independence and sexuality. Ooh, that I gotta highlight there. That's some important information right there. Mm-mm-mm. Some Black parents, aside from cautioning against pregnancy and the sexual predation of white men, views adolescent sexuality as a mature and expected stage in the process of becoming an adult. Thus, supervision carries less urgency. For example, in the newspaper columns published in 1887, Belle Doris advised on Black teenagers her courtship is free. If the girl has been properly reared by the parents, there should be to fear to let her meet her love alone. When we meet, watch her, and we tell her to plainly that we do not trust her. And as W. Boys observed in the Philadelphia Negro Black family might lack the funds to follow every formal social ritual, thus many working class Black men and women lived together and had children without marriage, which expected. What we deal with jumping the broom. Taken together, pre-20th century U.S. courtship was with variation marked by third-party interest and oversight. Whenever it was the state via what they call anti-miscegenation laws, the church enforced religion doctrines of our parents overseas and the sexual moray of their children. Personally, preference had less claims to primacy over community interest in marriage, what they call marriage compacts. Let me pause right there for a second. Get a quick breather. Take a look. All right, good. Mm-hmm. All right. Continuing. What they call matrimonial advertisement, the first American single ads. Interesting. As the 19th century inches towards the 20th, this third-party power over matrimonial decisions began to erode. The decline was evident for instance, during the large-scale 19th century immigration to the U.S. West, when individuals left family behind as they moved in search of work and land. Distance from family along with economic opportunity gains by the forced appropriation of indigenous lands free many white colonialist men with from dependency of elders for land or financial support. The westward migration also led to gender imbalance, such that more young white men than women were in the Great Plains and West Coast, starting with the gold rush in the 1840s. Thus, period of movement and resettlement sparks in the very first U.S. single ad. While family-centered courtship dominates, the more heavily populated East Coast advertisement, Medicaid or Medicaid marriage were more common in the West. Aiming loser communities control a small industrial cripple up in the attracts of women from eastern states and Europe to the male dominance frontier countries. Soon there were a variety of pre what they call prejudicial and catalogs devoting entirely to single ads by 1900. There were at least 20 in operation. The highest circulation weekly was what they call, and I'm gonna look at this good, what they call matrimonial news. I think that's what they call it. Matrimonial news. Published by Kansas City, Chicago, San Francisco, England from 1886 through 1901. So that's a period of 15 years. Yes, I'm right, 15 years, yeah. In 40 words or less, 19th century singles detail the attributes of their desired mates and their own, what they call, impto homo fedas, nupto bona fides. The ads were generally large by men, but women sometimes posted their own ads reflecting on the gender demand and supply of the market. Among the Western status, women ads were posted free of charge by necessity by ads were short and direct, essentially precursor to the classified newspaper singles ads that emerged in the late 20th century. They frequently reference physical appearance, including age, height, weight, and sometimes skin tone or ethnicity. For example, one ad published on January 8, 1887, read a window of 28, 5 feet 2 inches tall, black eye, hair, weighed 125, wish to make acquaintance of some dark complexioned gentleman at age 25 to 45 at a first rate housekeeping. Straightforward, these ads tend to reference the economic and romantic aspects of partnership, most expressed as preference for finding a partner of means and stability, specific income and real estate, and seeker who will bring to a marriage, or stipulated, specifically by income and real estate. Yeah. Back then, if you didn't add some form of income or you own some form of property, I mean, real estate. That's where the money's at, baby. Yeah. Importantly, the Western context meant a lesson percentually influence and the general lack of an extended slavery system. This means that cross-race pairing were far more likely in Western states than Eastern, and legacy that persists today. Indeed, throughout U.S. history, new immigrants groups have had highly rated of intermarriage, large because many of the first immigrants from any country were likely to be men. You hear that? So men were always traveling first, women second. In its specifics, the catalog marriage industry also expanded the opportunities for white ethnic minorities to find someone of similar faith or ethnic background. Abraham Keloff, a Russian Jewish immigrant living in the desolated, what they call desolated Parela of North Dakota, sought a Jewish spouse with an ad placed in a 1893 issue of the matrimonial news. I don't know if I pronounced it right. A wife of good, strong character is what I seek, but it is optional. To be of Jewish faith, and they're called Manori or Manadori. I think that's pronounced it. And to call off religious identity outweighs even integrity in the hierarchies of material needs. Ultimately, he married an 18-year-old Russian immigrant named Rachel, who would chronicle their homestead life and raise their seven children in a memoir. Today, their kind of targets advertisement still exists, and ads like Abraham Koloff brings to the mind website like Jada, which launched in 1997, and specifically in perils of Jewish singles. The development of catalog marriage advertisement was an important, what they call it, hand bringing of future courtship in particular ways. And not only indicates a shift away from parental arrangements and other third party outside or oversight, giving more agency in individual dates, but also implied dates of consciously what they call articulating what they sought in a partner. In this way, these advertisements are one of the earliest 19th century formal expressions of racial and ethnic preference in the process of searching for intimate partners. Although many records document people's racial and ethnic preference before that time. And these ads mark as moments in which it became common or clearly states such expressions as part of the efforts of finding institutions. I think it's institutions. Next page. Intimate partners, sorry. Intimate partners. Some of these advertisements were outright discriminating and negative statements against the Irish and Southern and earliest European, from example, blatant. 1 May, or the 1st of May, 1873 advertisement published to San Francisco papers, and it states, and this is what it states here, listen carefully. I am a 23-year-old age, and as a regard looking can average with most men, I am looking for a lady to make for my life, and I am heartily tired of bachelor life. I desire a lady not over 28 or over 30, over 35, 34, 33, 32. You get what I mean? Of age, not ugly. Well, I mean, that's going to be challenging after a certain age, but let's keep reading. Well educated and musically. Nationality makes no difference, only one preference, not to have a baby of Irish birth. She must have at least 20 grand. Oh, damn, this is looking for a nice lady who got money. My boy, see, I tell you what, man, they be pimping. They don't want no woman that don't bring nothing. They gotta bring something. You better look good. You better not be too fat. Hell, please don't bring no babies if you can. And bring some money to the white man. Mr. Zaddy wants his money, baby. He wants my money. Yeah. Anyhow, I just like that part. That was hysterical. The catalog marriage industry was a notable departure from third party oversight, but it operates within the prevalence racial system of late 19th and early 20th century United States. While undesirables the subcategories of whiteness, such as Irishness, were actively spelled out in the ad. Restricting against cross-racial perils went without saying. Postbellum anti-miscegenation laws criminalized and map culturally. Taboo practice onto the culture line, creating a full or a folk wisdom that said racial separation was normal. Even in the West, where out marriage was more common, people still self regulate in their individual courtship choice. Race still continues to dictate norms around U.S. courtship. Courtship in the age of what they call consumption. Now we're going to get to the part where the people are consuming too much, and you know me with consumption. Yeah, industrialization sparked the twite of arranged marriage and the slow but extraordinary turn away from full-fledged parental involvement in the U.S. Courtship and the Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism led to growing demand for wage work. In turns, people were pulled away from rural farmland and into urban centers. As these economic changes arrived, they brought with them new gender and labor dynamics. For example, late 19th century Victorian ideology promotes the idea that wage work was only for men, keeping many women out of the paid labor force for another century. Let me highlight that. That's very important. Yeah, that's very important. I hope you guys enjoying this so far. The, this added new layers to women reproductive rules. Hmm. Alleging their natural instinct for caregiving and homemaking overpaid work. Couples had once labored together to care for their children and produce goods in a family economy. But now the home was starting to be seen as a haven in the heartless world, in which men could seek refuge from a ruthless workplace. Put differential gender roles were reconstructed to cast women as unsuited for wage labor and men as unsuited for raising children and domestic work through maternal and parental roles had overlapped for centuries prior. Let's take a pause for a second, guys. All right, guys. Let's take a quick pause.
This service is provided in high definition by freeconferencecallhd.com. There are 8 participants in the conference. Q&A session has started. The recording has started.
Or what do you call filial duty and obedience to a focus on their children's happiness. And what is this happiness they try and really lay out? I always ask. As industrial rose, more women were recruited to wage labor in the 20th century. This trend further reduced family size and decreased women's economic dependency of husbands and fathers. Such change shift the norms and expectations associated with sex and marriage, increase as women and men become more autonomous and economically independent. They begin to have sexual relations before marriage. Yeah, we all know that. You're going to carry before you marry. Intimacy and pleasure became more central to their relationship as the first glimmering of a general shift from male head households to dual head households were felt. Sorry. The mid 20th century was a transitional period in many ways. One marks was the invention of dating. Let's read that again for those that's in the back. You right in the back. Yes, you right there. The mid 20th century was a transitional period in many ways. One mark was the invention of dating. So dating did not exist until the 20th century. Let's highlight that. That confirms it. Let's keep reading. Rather than supervision, formal calling courtship dating often involves unchaperoned excursions away from the home and into the world of parks and penny theaters. Poor urban youths, often living in crampy tenements, were central to this change. Calling courtship in the home was difficult for them, and new recreational activities and rising consumptions marked urbanizing cities. These young people worked in factories and were often expected to contribute to the family economy, but even a small amount of spending money introduced a degree of youthful independence that would have been impossible in an agrarian economy. National advertising systems promote leisure, and dating was one such lucrative activity. These campaigns found that producing and consumption behaviors sold best when guided with the promise of romance, love. Thus, one 1907 article notes, but here is what would happen if courting a popular sort of were to cease tomorrow. Theater, Florence, confectionery, jewelry's profits would decrease 33%. Let's read that again. If dating ended tomorrow, let's say this, or people stop dating, if that's from the article. I'm reading again for y'all. Thus, one 1907 article notes, but here is what would happen if courting of the popular sort were to cease tomorrow. This is the courting part. This will happen. Theaters, florists, confectioners, jewelers, profits would decrease 32%. Restaurants, harbor dashers, I think it's called. Yeah, it's called harbor dashers, nightclubs, and a score of similar industries will suffer what they call accordingly. Across board swaths of the U.S. populace, decisions above intimacy partners were being based on personal choice and preference rather than family and community choice. One other implication urbanization had for love and last in the United States was the emergence of gay life. Ooh. let's read it again. One of the other implications urbanization had for love and lust in the United States was the emergence of gay life. Those forces to live on a what they call marginal of society without social space in which they might form a firm identity based on sexuality, found it in cities of sort of crucial mass. LGBTQ courtship would remain largely hidden, constrained within small districts subculture until the gay liberation movement in the 1970s. Really, it started off in 1969, and you didn't see them start really take actual steps in carrying out the next year. Even then, U.S. gay and lesbian would find safety in urban enslaved and specialized spaces such as gay bars. There would be violent yet legal response, but nevertheless, the transition to a industrial economy was essential to a future proliferation of alternate households. By the end of the 20th century, a newfound consciousness of sexual identity emerged, such as gender preference had become an expected variable in any search for a mate. Earlier, though same-sex desires and practice occurred, it would have been almost unthinkable to wonder whether a young person prefers something or anything but a different sex partner. Dating today seems almost wholesome, but it was once scandalous. Mm. The term date originated in urban slang for scheduling a slot with a sex worker, and women who date were sometimes scored as charity girls, with exchange in kind gifts such as meals and entertainment for sexual flavor. So we're going to highlight that. That is very important right there. Yeah, that is very important. And you guys can get the book for yourself to really get a more clear context of this. Date venues, from cabs to ice cream parlors and movie theaters, were seen as dangerous vice resorts. But in the 1930s, prostitution, once used by U.S. or by many U.S. men of all social classes, rescinded as a common practice due to its increased criminalization and the institutionalization of dating as a courtship practice. Among as soon as dating became accepted, mainstream society concerned over the similarities of prostitution were soon forgotten. Hmm. As Beth Bailey showed in From Front Porch to Book Seat, dating had become the normative form of courtship. By World War II, early dating often took place in Nickelodeon, which began in popular cityscapes in 1905, and in dance hall by 1920s. Because people from different racial backgrounds all favored these places, early dating was a source of great anxiety for parents who feared cross-racial, what they call dalliances. A 1930s article points to diversity among people at one dance hall in New York, a what they call a languorous and fragile blonde floating gracefully in the arms of a Filipino, a little black hair flapper in the close and questionable embrace as a Chinaman, a Negro orchestra blaring out jazz tunes all around what they call Oriental Filipino Chinaman Japanese dancing with white girls. Alongside white families, black elites voiced reservations about the questionable influence of lower and antisocial cultural groups mixing with their children. And in his 1927 book, William Henry Jones, a professor at Howard University, compared dance hall behavior to what they call lascivious, lascivious orgies, or like what they call lavishing orgies. Man, tongue tie saying it. Many of modern dance are sexual patrimonies. A careful in investigation disclosed that the fact that the originators of these extreme forms of behaviors had clearly in views a sexual end. This anxieties that both black and white parents felt about potential for intergroups context was tied to the possibility of sexual exploration and indeed violent retribution in the absence of chaperoning courting. Still, with the rise of dating permanently roles and mates selecting um, record dramatically and the oversight of intimate relations shifted from the woman and family to the theory that couples, but given now a new gender economic norms, practice shift such as regulation to men and not women, as Bailey Shrew book title suggests power of transitional forms of parentalizing front porch to the back seat of the suitor's automobile, which is always a good type of back. It's always a good time when you banging a chick in the back seat of an automobile. Good times, good times. Yeah. Social acceptability norms quickly arose and reinforced the gender divide, dissecting that the only men could ask women on dates and that only men should pay for dates. Allegedly. At that time, yes. Under the calling model, it had been the opposite, with women of their families inviting men to call, or inviting men to call. Now, as social norms, restrictions, even working, women from spending their earnings in the new dating system, sexual favors, or the potential for the sexual favors because women's currency of exchange. Dating flourished even during the Great Depression and became a mainstream activity for most U.S. youths across income levels. Likewise, the beauty and fashion industries found dating a profitable enterprise. They could sell more products when they played on women's desires to attract men's attention. Let's highlight that. Yes, that is. They must get attention. If you don't get attention, they feel less important. Yes, yes, yes. I'm gonna highlight that right there. Cosmetic sales exploded by 1910. Let me read that again. Cosmetic sales exploded by 1910. So what they were doing for the last 19, we're in 2024. So let's say for the last century, or how was women putting makeup? I believe so, but I don't think it was much a trend at the time until after 1910. Could they market it to y'all in some way? Anyhow, in a way that would have been unthinkable when these were but the what they call instruments of stage actors and prostitutionals painted ladies. Similarly, women fashion turned to the invitation of the male gaze, or inventations of the male gaze, yes. Clothing exposed more skin. Dancing during the roaring 20s revealed ankles and legs and arms, opened a new market for the what they call deploration industries, or the de-exploitations industries, which profit from portraying women's bodies, hair as shameful and disgusting to potentially suitors, which is to say, the advent of dating marks the point when consumers' femininity became especially associated with making oneself sexual alluring to men. Yet, while what they call it, heteronormativity assume that men and women are to be intimately involved in courtship and marriage, racial boundaries are anchored by the presumption of cross-gender desires. Earlier 20th century disclosure of the what they call hegemonic white femininity assigned great feminine when of the values of beauty to whiteness or closer to whiteness and act as a symbolic yardstick for all feminists. Feminists. Let's read it again. White femininity assigns gender femininity values and beauties to whiteness or closer to whiteness and act as a symbolic yardstick for all feminists. Feminists. So the white standard, the white femininity, you know what to do. Let's say it with me, ladies and gentlemen. Long hair, makeup, lots of makeup, very much nice concealed but revealing enough clothing. Get it? That's what is, into my perspective, what they mean by that. And the prior femininity now is kind of changed now in the present day as we see now before the writing or the completion of this book. So let's keep going. This was clearly represented in popular cultures which signal white women's gender subservience to men, yet also emphasize women of color, particularly black women, feminine inadequacy, provision, controlling image of the mammy, the mammy, the mammy, the mammy. You hear that? So when they see the black woman today and present day now, they still portray black women, yes, you black women, as the mammy. They create movies portraying you as that mammy. Hell, they just respect you in the Jezebel like attitude, and they label that as mammy. You're not going to escape the image. If you're a black person in America, man, especially women, that is what they always perceive you as, that mammy. And we all know the role of the mammy. We have to go into detail of that. Let's continue. For example, constructing black women as aggressive, as hyper masculine, and represent light skin, fine features, and wave of straight hair as part and parcel of hegemonic ideally of feminine beauty. Highlighting all that. That's very important. Important. Let's look at that. The growing 20th century ethnic beauty industry around embodies beauty practice such as hair relaxers, skin lighteners, also results in part from how women of color have had to spend more time, resource, and energy to, as Devon Carbaldo put it, making themselves up women. Let's read that again. Read that again, slowly, very slowly. The growing 20th century ethnic beauty industries around embodies beauty practice such as hair relaxers, straighten your hair with that white glue, that poison glue. Skin lighteners, that cream, the bleach. They are bleach the skin. Also results in part from how women of color have had to spend more time, resource, and energy to, as Devon Carl Badeau put it, making themselves up women. So without all this, you're not a woman. You're making yourself to be a woman. Damn. Highlighting that. That's deep. In this sense, hegemonic femininity also creates interarchals of beauty among women, or interarchal beauty for women, amongst other women. According to courtships researchers, dating itself involves, though, two phases in the 1930s and 1940s. A competitive form of dating and rating arose, which emphasized popularity and status are reflecting in the number of first dates one could garner. Serial monogamy came to define the post-World War II form of dating, with dating transitional quickly into the process of going steady. The shift to universal attendance at high school across the United States during this period, institutionalizing the practice with the elevation of peer based socializing norms over family based social life. Thus, dating became the norms not just for college students, but also for high school students as well. And third party mediators shift from the church and family to peer. In the 1940s, couples most frequently met through family connection. In subsequent decades, they must frequently meet through friends. Yet the autonomy, anatomy linked to the rise of dating didn't bridge racial divides or transform the long stand of racial hierarchy in the U.S. life. Indeed, dating exploded onto the scene just as anti-miscegenation laws and racial segregation took hold. Groups of the cusp of becoming white, such as Italians, Irish, and early 20th century often pursues or we call pressures members against fraternizing with African Americans and other non-white stigmatizing groups. Such social control operates through the institutional of the family, through socializing and what they call ostracism or ostrich racism. Among African Americans, the pressure had the different source. The history of ongoing realities of sexual assault against black women and violence against black men who consort with white women led to communities scrutiny and what they call ostracism of white black pairing. As a result, even the greater interracial what they call fraternization and dating arose. Interracial dating and marriage remained stigmatized. And onto the 21st century, social pressures conflict with the rise of personal preference and intimate partner choice. Even as the latter rose, the former remained in force. That is it for part one. And I mean, that's the end of this part of chapter 2, from the black porch to computer screens. I'm gonna highlight that and stop right here. Put this aside. Hope you guys enjoyed that session. Hope you learned something. Hope you did. I hope you did. I'm seeing the board now. I'm going to stop it here for now. Tune in for the next episode for this. We're going to conclude part 2 of this on the next reading. Like always, like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. And like always, and I mean always, thank you again. Take care, and good night.